Usually when we talk about education and career paths, we operate under this collective assumption that the whole system works like a giant transactional vending machine.
Right, a vending machine. I like that.
Yeah, like you put your time and your tuition money into the slot at the top, you punch the button for your highly specialized tech degree, and a lucrative job just drops out into the tray at the bottom. We're totally conditioned to believe in that clean transaction.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is the ultimate comfort narrative, right? Input a predictable amount of effort, output a stable, high-paying career. And for a long time, that equation mostly held up.
But then you step into the world of high-level enterprise technology. Specifically, I'm talking about the job market for SAP developers. And suddenly, that vending machine is just completely jammed.
Completely broken.
Yeah, you've got literally thousands of people feeding their life savings into the machine, pressing the button over and over, and absolutely nothing is dropping out. The tray is empty.
That visual captures it perfectly. It's the absolute definition of a systemic bottleneck. Because the formal qualifications are there on paper, right? The certificates have the fancy foil stamps on them. But the reality of corporate hiring is telling a much harsher story.
Which is exactly why we're here. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're exploring a fascinating and, frankly, incredibly detailed breakdown by an industry insider named Suraj.
Yeah, Suraj's analysis is so eye-opening here.
It really is. He highlights this massive disconnect in the tech employment market, looking at why entry-level candidates, freshers, as they're often called in at SAP ABAP, are just struggling to even get a single interview, let alone a job, despite finishing these extensive training programs.
Right, they have the training, but no callbacks.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the harsh reality of this market, figure out why this bizarre experience paradox exists, and, extract some actionable strategies for breaking into these high-barrier tech fields.
And this is such a critical discussion for anyone listening. Because the dynamics happening here, they aren't just isolated to SAP. They expose a fundamental flaw in how technical skills are basically commodified and sold to eager learners.
That is exactly why I wanted to dig into this material. This isn't just some technical manual. It's a masterclass in why specialized tech degrees do not always equal instant jobs. So whether you are trying to break into the tech industry yourself, or maybe you're mentoring someone, or you're just curious about how corporate hiring actually functions behind closed doors, this deep dive is going to give you a major aha moment.
It really requires us to look past all those glossy marketing brochures from the training institutes. We have to look at the actual mechanics of enterprise-level risk management.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start with the core problem. Suraj calls it the experience requirement issue. I just think of it as the ultimate catch-22.
Yeah, it really is.
Because students are spending months getting certified. They have the piece of paper. But every single job description demands like 2+ years of experience and real-time project experience. It's an incredibly aggressive, defensive posture from employers.
It is aggressive, but honestly, it makes sense when you look at the tech.
Well, I want to use an analogy here. Hiring a fresher to write code for a massive live SAP system. It feels basically like handing the keys of a multi-million-dollar commercial airliner to a 22-year-old who only has a certificate from playing a flight simulator game in their bedroom.
That airliner comparison is highly accurate. Seriously. To understand why companies are so paranoid, you have to understand what SAP actually does. It's an enterprise resource planning system.
Right, an ERP.
Exactly. We aren't talking about some trendy little app on your phone. It is the central nervous system of massive global corporations. This software manages the global supply chain, the factory floor robotics, the payroll for 80,000 employees, raw materials, financial compliance, all of it. Every single module is deeply interconnected.
So the stakes are astronomically high. We aren't talking about a website crashing. We're talking about a multinational corporation going completely blind.
Millions of dollars could be lost in hours. Look, if a junior developer makes a syntax error in a standard web app, maybe a checkout button doesn't work for an hour. It's annoying, it's embarrassing, but it's highly fixable.
Right, you patch it, move on.
Yeah. But if a junior developer in SAP ABAP makes a mistake in the code that handles, say, automated inventory movement, they could literally halt a physical automotive manufacturing production line.
Wow.
Yeah. These systems take years and tens of millions of dollars to implement. The cost of failure is catastrophic. That is exactly why companies have zero tolerance for hiring people without battle-tested project experience.
Okay, that paints a very clear picture of their defensive strategy. But I have to push back here.
Sure.
If these systems are so incredibly guarded and the gates are locked so tight, why are there suddenly thousands of freshers applying for them? Where is this massive army of applicants coming from if the industry is actively locking them out?
What's fascinating here is how the market perception has completely detached from reality. Historically, like a decade or two ago, SAP was this incredibly niche, specialized skill. Very few people had access to even learn it.
Because it was so expensive to get the software.
Exactly. And because of that scarcity, the few who did know it commanded massive premium salaries. That historical fact created this gold rush mentality that still persists today. Fast forward to now, and we have an absolute oversaturation of eager learners.
I see.
The independent training market realized they could heavily monetize that lingering gold rush perception.
Ah, so they are the ones selling the shovels during a gold rush where all the mines are basically already closed.
That is exactly the dynamic. Now you have massive training institutes in almost every major city just aggressively pumping out candidates across all these SAP modules.
Right, they're teaching ABAP for the programming, FICO for finance, MM for materials, SD for sales.
Exactly. Because of this industrialized training pipeline, thousands of students graduate every single year. It completely upends the supply and demand curve. But the massive corporations, they haven't changed their risk tolerance one bit. They still offer extremely limited entry-level openings.
Which brings us to what I think is the most heartbreaking part of this entire breakdown. The financial and emotional investment these students are making, only to hit a brick wall. Suraj points out they're paying anywhere from 30,000 to 200,000 rupees for these courses.
It's a massive amount of money.
It is. We are talking about drained life savings or heavy student loans. So looking at that price tag, I have to wonder, are the certificates completely worthless, or are they just learning the wrong things?
It is a profound, almost tragic gap between what is sold and what is actually delivered. Suraj explicitly describes it as selling fake dreams.
Fake dreams, that's harsh.
But true. They lure students in by promising 100% placement guarantees. They promise immediate starting salaries of 8 lakhs per annum. They promise direct consultant jobs right out of the gate. But the actual curriculum, it's fundamentally basic.
Let's define basic here. Because to someone outside of tech, learning any programming language sounds pretty advanced. Are we talking about just reading definitions out of a textbook?
They teach the foundational theory. They'll teach basic ABAP syntax, how to write simple internal reports, the structure of internal tables, and how to navigate the data dictionary. It's the bare minimum required to say you know the language.
So it's the equivalent of learning the alphabet and basic grammar rules, while the employer needs you to walk in on day one and write a compelling, complex, multi-layered novel.
That is the exact gap. The institutes completely fail to teach the messy, unpredictable project work that companies actually need. A massive auto manufacturer doesn't just use standard, out-of-the-box SAP software. They need it heavily customized for their factory floor rules, their union agreements, their supplier contracts.
And I imagine that requires a totally different tool set than just writing a basic report.
It requires highly advanced concepts that the institutes just ignore. Things like enhancements, user exits, business add-ins, or Beatty smart forms, iDocs.
Wait, let's break some of that down. What's a user exit?
Think of a user exit like a custom backdoor that SAP intentionally leaves open in their code. SAP knows a massive car manufacturer will have unique rules standard software can't predict. So they leave these exits where a developer can safely plug in custom logic without breaking the core system.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and a BADI is just a more upgraded, complex version of that.
And I'm guessing training institutes don't teach that because, well, to teach someone how to use a user exit properly, you have to actually understand the car manufacturer's business logic, not just basic code.
Precisely. It requires knowing how to handle real contradictory client requirements. The institutes skip it because it's hard to teach, requires real industry experience, and you can't easily test it with a multiple choice exam.
So the inevitable crushing reality sets in. The student pays their 200,000 rupees, they spend months studying, they get their shiny certificate, they miraculously land an interview, and they completely freeze up.
Yeah, because the interviewer isn't going to ask them to define a basic term. They're going to ask practical, scenario-based questions to test their reflexes.
Like what?
They'll ask, how would you write a program for an ALV report? Or walk me through the exact architectural difference between a BADI and a user exit? Or how do you systematically debug a program failing in a live production environment?
And if all you've got is theoretical grammar, you're a deer in the headlights. You don't have the mental framework to even begin answering.
And the very moment that hesitation happens, the hiring manager immediately recognizes this candidate has zero real project exposure. The interview is effectively over right then.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because these freshers lack the practical skills and face this wall of rejection, they compensate in the only way they know how. Sheer, overwhelming volume.
The spray and pray strategy.
Yes. Suraj talks about this. Freshers are applying to 100 companies a day with these incredibly weak, theory-only resumes. And it strikes me that this reaction fundamentally misunderstands the entire SAP ecosystem.
Right.
In typical software development, say building web apps in JavaScript, you can totally do that.
Right.
You shoot off 100 resumes, and maybe some tiny startup takes a chance on you because you're cheap, you're enthusiastic, and the stakes are low.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your startup analogy hits on the exact macroeconomic reality of SAT. It is, by definition, an enterprise-level tool. You will only find it in massive manufacturing companies, global automobile companies, giant pharmaceutical firms.
The titans of industry, the Fortune 500.
Right. Small companies and scrappy startups simply do not use SAP. It is vastly too expensive, taking millions to license, and way too complex for their needs. They use web apps or cheaper cloud-based SaaS tools.
So that total pool of available SAP jobs is actually much smaller than general software development. And the barrier to entry is radically higher because there are no mom-and-pop SAP shops to cut your teeth on.
Exactly. You cannot treat an SAP job hunt like a generic tech job hunt. When a hiring manager at a global enterprise receives a resume boasting only a training certificate and basic ABI knowledge, it goes straight into the trash.
Straight to the trash. No second looks.
No second looks. They are not looking for enthusiastic beginners to mold. They want proven projects, advanced problem solving, deep technical understanding, and unwavering confidence. Throwing 100 weak resumes at the wall every day just generates 100 silent rejections.
It's a fundamental misallocation of effort. So if spray and pray is just a recipe for exhaustion, there has to be a backdoor. You can't change that these massive companies demand experience, and you can't magically buy experience. So what does this all mean for you listening? How do you hack the definition of experience to get your foot in the door? Suraj lays out a specific roadmap, and it requires a total paradigm shift.
It requires completely abandoning the mindset of entitlement, the idea that this certificate entitles you to the job. You have to move toward a mindset of undeniable practical execution. The very first step Suraj outlines is the absolute necessity of building complex mini projects entirely on your own.
Getting out of the textbook and building your own flight simulator, essentially.
Exactly.
But if printing Hello World doesn't cut it, what does? How complex does a mini project actually have to be to get a hiring manager's attention?
You have to build things that mirror actual messy business needs. Don't just write a script. Build a comprehensive employee management report. Build a sales report using ALV. Design a highly functional smart form invoice. Write a simple module pool program.
And then you show that off.
Yeah, when you walk into an interview with these, you aren't just verbally claiming you know the theory. You are dropping physical proof on the table.
I want to pause on the smart form invoice example because that perfectly illustrates the shift from theory to practice. An invoice isn't just typing numbers onto a digital page. To build a functioning invoice in SAP, you have to pull live data from the warehouse module, the pricing engine, the customer database, and the tax tables all simultaneously.
Right.
If you can build that, you prove you understand how the entire SAP nervous system connects.
That is the exact insight. It changes the entire dynamic of the interview. You are no longer defensively apologizing for your lack of experience. You are offensively presenting your technical portfolio. But to build those, you must self-educate on all the advanced concepts the Institute skipped.
Right, the BADIs and user exits.
Exactly. You have to focus heavily on ALV reports, smart forms, BADIs, user exits, BAPIs, and IDOCs. To give you another example, an IDOC is essentially an electronic courier.
Like a messenger pigeon for data.
Exactly. It's the standardized format SAP uses to send data, like a massive purchase order, from one corporate system to another completely different system. You have to know them intimately.
Okay, let's talk about the interview prep itself, because Suraj makes a brilliant point here. You have to stop preparing for a basic vocabulary spelling test and start preparing for a tactical, scenario-based exam.
You need to know the answers to highly nuanced questions, the questions that expose whether you've actually run the code. For example, not just what is a select statement, but what is the exact performance difference between coding a select single versus a select and select.
Oh, and let me guess the business case for that. In a classroom, testing on a tiny database, both commands successfully pull the data. But in a live corporate environment, one command might take 0.1 seconds, and the other might inadvertently lock up a database of 10 million customer records and crash the entire system.
That is exactly what happens. One is efficient, the other creates a catastrophic memory bottleneck. You also need to know the different types of internal tables, like when to use an ITAB versus a hash table. You need a deep understanding of the SAP data dictionary, and crucially, how transport requests work.
Transport requests. Suraj emphasizes this heavily. A transport request is basically the highly controlled mechanism for moving your newly written code from the safe development environment into the testing environment and finally into the live production environment.
Right.
It's like moving a fragile, priceless sculpture from an artist's studio into a crowded public gallery. If you mess up the transport, you break the live system.
And understanding that process generates the one thing companies are desperately looking for: confidence. When you can fluently speak to the mechanics of a transport request and database efficiency, you sound like a peer. You sound like a developer, not a student.
But even with all that intense preparation, the complex mini projects, the deep knowledge, there is a massive psychological hurdle here that Suraj mentions. And honestly, I think it might be the hardest part for a lot of people to accept. You have to swallow your pride.
It is arguably the most critical and painful step in the entire roadmap.
Because you've been explicitly promised this glamorous, direct placement as an SAP consultant making 8 lakhs per annum, you have a certificate that says you're an expert. And you have to let all of that go.
You must completely drop that expectation. The goal isn't the highest starting salary. The goal is simply getting inside the building. Suraj advises freshers to actively seek out SAP internships, trainee roles, or very junior ABAP developer positions. Even if the pay is a fraction of what you were promised, you take it.
Because once you're in, the whole game fundamentally changes.
The moment you have just 6 months of verified real-world SAP experience on your resume, the entire experience paradox shatters. You cross the threshold. You are no longer an untested liability. You're a junior developer with actual verified flight hours.
Just 6 months.
6 months of humble, low-paying experience completely changes your career trajectory. The very same recruiters who silently binned your 100 resumes will actively start reaching out to you on LinkedIn.
It's incredible how ruthlessly binary it is. You're either a massive risk or you are a proven asset. There is very little middle ground in enterprise tech.
Which is why intense patience, continuous self-directed learning, and a willingness to start at the bottom are the only real bridges over that gap.
So, to pull all of this together for you listening, while SAP remains this incredibly powerful, lucrative, and deeply integrated technology, breaking into it requires you to completely drop the illusion that education is a simple vending machine.
Right.
A certificate does not equal a job. It's a harsh reality. But once you understand it, it's an incredibly empowering one. Breaking in requires self-directed project building, a mechanical understanding of complex tools, and a willingness to start at the absolute bottom as a trainee to get those crucial first flight hours.
It is a gauntlet, without a doubt, but understanding how the gauntlet works is the only way to survive it. And, if we step back and connect this hyper-defensive hiring behavior to the broader tech industry, it leaves us with a truly fascinating, almost dangerous contradiction to consider.
Where are we going with this?
Well, think about the logical, long-term conclusion of this market behavior. If every major global enterprise absolutely refuses to hire freshers today because their systems are deemed far too expensive to risk, how exactly does the industry plan to replace its senior developers when they inevitably retire in 10 or 15 years?
Wow, they are cutting off their own supply line.
By creating